So I'm going to do a little bit more of an introduction of David. This is how I thought the night would go. I'm going to take control here. So I thought I'd do a little bit more of an introduction of David, and then I could tell you about how we met. And then there's actually a chapter dedicated to our work in the book, and I thought David might read some of that. It's primo chapter. And then I have about 1,000 questions for you. If you haven't read the book, read the book. This is probably I was just saying to David that he's probably the only person I would do this for. I don't interview people usually. And I'm so moved by who he is as a human being. I'm so moved by the book, and especially at this time in history, I think it's really important. So I have about 1,000 questions, and then I thought we could open some questions up for you. How's that? Good? Okay. So you heard the basic kind of mini, and then you should know that his actual resume looks like this, his bio looks like this, but there are a few really key pieces about places that he's been that I think place him on the map in my mind to have you know how he could put together a book like he put together. So as was mentioned, he's won both an Emmy and a Peabody for his role as executive producer in the documentary 9/11. And then he also contributes frequently, both photojournalism as well as humorous articles and cartoons, which appeared in the Washington Post, Discover, the Common Review, and the online journal Salon. And he also has poetry in the New Yorker. He's been a correspondent, and he's covered conflicts in Afghanistan and Lebanon and elsewhere. As an editor, he wrote the Deep Throat story of 2005. He's conducted interviews with Presidents Reagan and Clinton, amongst others. He's helped secure exclusive photo sessions with a variety of subjects, including the victims of Chernobyl, White House intern Monica Lewinsky, and George W. Bush. He established both Life and Vanity Fair's internet sites, and this is another piece that tells you about his heart in my mind. And he won the Online Journalism Award for 20 years AIDS in photography. He was also named Curator of the Year for 2008. He is a lifelong Cubs fan. This actually comes in the bio. And his wife, Nancy Paulson, is also an editor of children's books for 30 years, and she has her own imprint at Penguin. And all of this is infinitely impressive, as is the rest of his bio. But the thing that I want to say is, and the reason that I'm here tonight is David Friend is one of the most intimate human beings I've ever encountered. And I think the reason that that's so important, I've been interviewed by everyone from the New York Times to Gawker, and I think the reason that that's important is that intimacy is what has it be that the truth can come out. It was from his capacity to have reverence and respect for a topic that had it be that a deeper level of revealing could happen. And that's what you witness in the book. And he takes such incredibly, seemingly disparate topics and then pulls them together in this way that it's deeply personal. And that for me, so many lights went on. Oh, that's what shaped me. That's what shaped my views. And so the reason to me that this book is so important is that there are so many books right now that say where we're at. And there are a lot of books that say where we've been. There are very few that connect the dots and tell us how where we've been affects where we are. It gives us some idea of how to, if we want, potentially get to a better place. And so I left the book both well-informed, but also with a lot of hope of what we could do. And I felt like, oh, this is a really good, strong bedrock understanding. So I have 1,000 questions about that, but I thought David could read now. Good?
I'm just so touched by that and blushing, so it's my natural state. I'm near Nicole anyway, so thank you all for coming tonight, as Nicole said the same. I'll just read a little passage about Nicole in the 1990s. And you'll get a little sense of, though many of you know this story, I'll give you a little background for those who don't. Nicole Daedone was celibate for much of 1997. She had recently navigated a series of complicated relationships with men. She'd been buffeted by the death of her estranged father. Nicole, a San Francisco art gallerist who had studied sexual identity in college and semantics in grad school, was looking for answers, having always been a searcher. When things seemed darkest, she sought guidance from various spiritual teachers, eventually returning to the Buddhism and meditation practices that had grounded her when she was younger. As part of this journey, she renounced sex for a year. And then, finding herself at a personal crossroads, she decided to make a lifelong commitment. She would enter a Zen monastery, a Zen community in San Francisco, and become a monk. She's the best looking monk I've ever seen. Nicole was not standard monk material. Her body was sinuous, her laugh vigorous, her hungers voracious. She had probing eyes, cocoa butter skin, and long cinnamon tresses. She has since gone honey blonde. We can explain that later. Part Sicilian, part Romanian, she occasionally wrote steamy prose about her erotic encounters. With only a week to go before her scheduled move to the monastery, she hesitated, wondering if she really had the will to refrain from earthly temptations. As a test, she now recalls, she decided to go wild for a week. She had spent a year in abstinence, and now she would roll full tilt in the other direction. On her first night out, pursuing what she calls the 7 deadly sins, murder, uncool, she found herself at a party in San Francisco, of all places, suddenly drawn to a French-Belgian stranger with black hair, dark eyes, and a spiritual vibe. They talked about her pending entry into monastic life. In her response, he offered to show her a practice he thought might help her. Intrigued, she joined him the following night in a quiet room at the ashram where he was staying. Okay, he said, after exchanging pleasantries, take off your pants. Nicole was suspicious, yet game. She did as she was told. Lie down. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I hope I got this all right. Lie down, he suggested, though he remained fully clothed. She lay down. Open your legs, he said. And she spread for him he directed the beam of an adjustable wall lamp toward her widened frame. Frightened and confused, she felt herself descending into a trance state, remaining motionless. His voice was tender, deliberate, enveloping. Your inner labia look like a coral, he said. There is a deep rose color at the edges, and it fades into a pearlescent pink at the base. I can see your clitoris peeking out from beneath your hood, which is tilted slightly to the side. For several minutes he went on, describing each fold and ridge, his voice washing over her in waves. She felt tears coming, felt time slowing, felt deep compassion emanating from him. He set a timer for 20 minutes, and as she would later write, he sat at my right side, he wrapped one leg beneath my legs and placed the other over my belly. He placed his right hand beneath my behind and placed his thumb gently into my opening, anchoring me to his palm from the base of my introitus. He slid his left index finger up through my labia and onto the upper left-hand quadrant of my clitoris. He stroked, he narrated, explaining everything that he was doing, everything that he felt in my body. He began to stroke up and down, then down and down. His touch grazing the soft groove just to the left of her clitoris. After a time, she would describe it. Everything in me ignited, my entire consciousness became that spot. The center of my body buzzed like a phone wire. I felt each stroke. I felt him speed up, then slow down, shift direction. A thought rose. I am home. Later, when the clock's buzzers signaled that 20 minutes had elapsed, he grounded her and gently toweled her off. He rose, smiling, and offered Nicole her pants. Come back anytime you want to do this again. Nicole would become the American overseer of this practice and proselytizer of this practice, which has changed the lives of thousands of people in this country and around the world. And I believe in what Nicole's doing, and really feel that having met her and Reese Jones, who's here tonight, I'm better off for it as having found two people who really believe in what they do and spread a wonderful gospel to people. So I'm happy to have you with us tonight, and happy to be using let her rip, whatever.
Okay, you guys ready?
Ready.
So I just want to look. So this is
Happy
the
to
book.
sign for all of you. It's also an audiobook.
If you can get the book, it's stunning. I'm in the middle of writing a book. I avoid reading anything, and I couldn't put the book down. It's amazingly good and personal. That to me is, again, why it's so good. So just for a really basic question, what had you, it's such a rare position that you take. First of all, what had you get interested in the naughty 90s? And then how did you pinpoint that sexuality was such a core factor that was determining the cultural milieu?
It's interesting because when I thought to write the book, when I began the idea of the concept, it was like really early to think that way. Like, how can we have history in, in the 2000s? Now it seems, oh God, what an obvious book to have written. Everybody's talking about the 90s. You've got, Twin Peaks and Will and Grace are back, and OJ's out of prison, and it's like everything's 90s nostalgia. But at the time in early 2000, mid 2000s, I was having dinner with a friend of mine who's a cardiologist, and he told me the backstory of the discovery of Viagra. And I thought, this is a great story. What happened was it was a heart drug, and a lot of the patients in the early trials in the early 90s were finding a little bit of a side effect, and they weren't getting their pills back. And so I thought, boy, that's really a good story. And he went through how it was discovered, and then I was thinking back to what I was doing in the 90s. I was raising two kids, and my daughter was constantly doing sit-ups to be like Britney Spears. She wanted like these washboard abs, and my son was playing these massive player games late at night on the internet, and I was thinking everything is so sexualized in this culture, and I began to see these patterns with, obviously with what was going on with Clinton, and there was a sort of sexual overlay on the culture, I felt. So I thought, well, maybe I should really find what that's all about and find these untold stories of unwitting pioneers like you. I didn't know you even existed. I mean, during writing the book, I got to meet Reese, and I got to interview people like David Ewing Duncan, who's here. And after a while, I sort of began to see the decade through the eyes of strangers, but also of and pioneers like you, but also through the people who formed the decade. So the book I interviewed everyone from Anita Hill to Monica Lewinsky to the scientists behind Viagra. I actually talked to all of them. So that was the genesis.
So like 30 questions from that, but I'll do the Viagra question. So it seemed, I love the Viagra chapter. I had no idea that it was an accident. And so just in the beginning to see how it built and how hunger actually began to dictate it. And that was kind of a swing point when it looks to me in the book like that sexuality itself began to be propped up. Like it started to get more and more artificial at that point. How do you think that plays out into sexuality today?
Well, I think we're now living into this, and you and I talked a little bit about this when I was interviewing, I don't know if you remember, but about body image earlier in the decade and how in the 80s and 90s women were enhancing. You had sort of a lot of artificial, and this was true throughout the culture in the 80s and 90s, was this sort of let's change who we are physically, and let's, drugs became quite important. All aspects of, it was the decade that had Prozac Nation and et cetera. So I think we were altering ourselves physically in ways that are profound. I think you had, transgender movement was really important in the 90s. Everyone was flocking to Colorado. This became a big deal in the 90s. My brother still does counsels a lot of people who were transitioning. But what else did you have? You had something that had happened in the 50s that was now coming to the fore again, which was estrogen replacement therapy, which was a big deal for women to reinvigorate their sex lives, and they were suddenly there was this thing in 1998 that was introduced in the spring called Viagra, and you had a much older class of men and women who were having an ability to embrace their sexual selves. Used to be, you were tired, you got older, and really for many people sexuality wasn't as key a factor, but now you are seeing more people later in life have this ability to engage more sexually in both male and female. And then you're also seeing this extension. About 97, 98, there was a study that showed that for as much as 15% of the population, puberty was occurring earlier, and as young as people as the age of 8, girls as early as the age of 8. So what you had was, a sexualized culture and young people having to understand sexuality earlier. You had this latchkey society where many people were having two people in a family, or one not at home during the daytime, so the kids would be home and experimenting more. You had hooking up, which was a new thing in the late 80s, early 90s. So I think the whole culture became sexually turbocharged. The impact now, unfortunately, this is really the seedbed of creation of the World Wide Web, which I'm sure we'll get into, but so many people are now attached to their devices that there was a great article in the Atlantic 2 months ago where kids seem more often to have less sex now, that there's more, they go to bed with the phones, they wake up with the phones, and there's less and less hanging out with their peers, because what's happening is they're more attached to one another electronically and to their own personas and how they're projecting their persona. So I think sexuality has changed in this period for younger people, and it's still, the jury's out. But.
Okay, so then I'll roll on that a little bit.
Sure.
One of the stories I thought was really powerful was the Pamela Anderson sex tape story, and this idea.
It's a very highbrow book.
Yeah. But it really gives you the heart of how these things, these seemingly accidental things, really shape where we're at today. That was what was so interesting. And so you see this massive uptick in porn with the World Wide Web, and then the Pamela Anderson story breaks.
Yeah, it's a great transition, because the web was really this, you know, it changed everyone's lives. It may be as important, we'll find out, but maybe as important as the Gutenberg printing press, and you just in terms of how everyone could communicate the good it's done in the world. It is Jerome, how do you pronounce it? Jerome Lanier? People that might know
Jaron Lanier.
Jaron Lanier, you know, says this is the grandest experiment. It was all for good. You know, the internet was just this experiment that didn't have the usual motives behind getting people to participate in the project, like death or getting fired or, you know, needing money. No, people for free contributed to this project over time, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. Well, now we know we've seen the dark side, and it got very ugly very fast. And one of the things that did happen in 1996, I think, or 7, I think it was 96, was Pamela Anderson was getting married to Tommy Lee Jones, Tommy Lee. Tommy Lee, and he's also known because of his relationship as a roommate with Al Gore. That's cool. So they make a honeymoon tape, so-called, hide it in a safe. It's for their own purposes, and a disgruntled worker who had been doing some work on their deck comes into the house and sneaks into hears about it, steals the safe that it's locked in, takes it out, and somehow this is suddenly is on videotapes and is suddenly sold on the internet. And the Wall Street Journal would say, so the tape shows the couple fishing and boating and having unbelievable sex over many days. And it's the first time that really a celebrity sex tape second time, the celebrity sex tape sort of went totally viral. And the Wall Street Journal would say that more people came onto the internet to watch this. People who had never seen porn before in their lives, but came on to watch this.
Isn't that crazy?
And
It's
this
a
is
disgruntled worker.
Yeah, and this was sort of helped tip the scale for people's reaction to the internet. It was like, what is this thing? Maybe there's some potential in this thing. So when the history of the web is written, and you have this Pamela Anderson tape, many people code, their websites, with /Pamela/sex tape / to get more traffic. It became a real thing, and weirdly, when you look back 20 years on it, this is one of the drivers.
Yeah, it seems like that's a moment where what had been, this seems like the decade when privacy begins to blur. And that was one of the moments in the book when it became really evident to me.
Yeah, and we see this now, of course, today. This is a big question with Google and Amazon and Facebook. How much information is being given out? What is the penetration the Russians have or others have, or hackers have? So it's still, a key question. What is private? How is I just edited a story in Vanity Fair, which came out last week, which many of you would probably know the main character, Peter Thiel. And it's a piece about Peter's background and the role he may be offered. Three White House sources tell us that he may now be the head of all intelligence for the United States government. And his oversight position for the PIA, which is a civilian position that oversees all the intelligence agencies, and he's been offered the job according to three sources. They're still working on terms and whether he'll do it or not. But within that story, some people in the West Wing said to us, look, they're seriously looking into the government is seriously looking into whether or not to make, because of monopolistic practices, whether to make Amazon, Google, and Facebook public utilities. That's what this government is thinking about. So read the current issue of Vanity Fair, you'll see that. Crazy. I didn't know we'd go there, but this is where we're talking about privacy.
So, okay, good. So you also, in the very beginning, mentioned...
Really, do your homework. This is great.
I do. So you also mentioned Anita Hill and... Oh, not that. This I thought was the most powerful story.
Okay. Sorry. No, that's fine. Whatever you want to ask.
Back to it. I'm an investigative reporter. So you also mentioned Anita Hill, and that story was so interesting in that you put Madonna right before Anita Hill. And Diplo, is that how you pronounce it?
Diplo, yeah.
Is quoted as saying, and I love this quote, all the women start with Madonna. No matter where you come from, no matter what you're doing now, if you are a powerful woman, the genesis is Madonna. And then right after that, we follow with Anita Hill, and you note she had profound effect on the workplace, but also I think in many ways our ideas about sexuality and constraint and how far we could go. So we have these two poles. On the one hand, you have the embodiment of sexual power in Madonna, and then you have Anita Hill. How do you think those two women and their roles play into where women are at today?
Well, it's interesting. I read a lot about third wave feminism and the whole evolution of feminism, but then why this was so important in the Pacific Northwest and Washington D.C. and throughout the country, where you had women not being organized as they've been in the 70s and 80s. By here's an agenda. Let's stick together. Let's all do the same thing because we need to get political power. We need agency, and we have to. And it really affected change. It was effective that way. But by the 90s, it was a sort of DIY, do-it-yourself feminism, where women were going to find themselves by themselves on their own terms, not by an agenda that was set up by other feminists, but not by an agenda that was set up by men, not by it was being set up on itself. And part of that was, and the reason you see Madonna and Anita Hill in the same chapter is that one chapter is I write about third wave feminism and feminism in the period. The other chapter following that is I write about 5 or 6 people who I really think were sort of important as American icons in terms of changing women's roles. One is Hillary Clinton. One was Demi Moore, who appeared on the cover of Vanity Fair and really changed what pregnancy looked like and what sexual allure was about, and her films as well. One was Annie Leibovitz, who took that picture. I was with her yesterday at this conference in LA. That's why I'm dressed in white. I'm wearing like LA clothes.
Where's your black?
But we were doing a big Vanity Fair conference. And then Ellen DeGeneres, who came out twice. She came out in her personal life and on the cover of Time magazine, but then also in the show Ellen. So I write about her, and then this really amazing pioneer was Anita Hill, who I spent a lot of time with. First, Madonna. So Madonna, of all the women I interviewed, everybody talked about Madonna as being important to them, young and old, as being this sort of ideal. I'm gonna be myself. It's so many of her songs and even the song title, but really are about self-expression, about power, about female empowerment. So she was just really key, and I had to take out. I had a second chapter on Madonna, which I took out. The book was like I wrote 250,000 words. It was like metastasizing. And then, and so Anita Hill in 1991 was, and I went to interview her twice up in Boston area, and she was really an unwitting player. The right sort of brands her as, these are old charges from the 80s that she remembered with Clarence Thomas, just to remind the younger folks here, she had been harassed, actually claimed she had been sexually harassed by Clarence Thomas repeatedly while she was working for him, and in the 80s confided in a number of colleagues, one of whom was going to be here tonight, but I guess he's not here, friend of mine, and she ended up investigators and found this out, that she had made these claims to people, and they said, why don't you ask, you're looking into Clarence Thomas as being nominated for the Supreme Court, why don't you ask her? So they started asking the question, and she finally agreed, if others were going to testify, that she would testify. She became the face of sexual harassment in the workplace in this country, and she testified against Thomas. It was, everybody was riveted to the television, and at the end of the day, even though she was facing an all-white, all-male panel, she really hit a nerve. However, at the end of those 2 days of testimony, there was a poll taken, and more people, 6 out of 10 people, believed Clarence Thomas, not Anita Hill. She felt that she made a point, that it was important for her to do this. In fact, afterwards, more people filed sexual harassment claims than ever did before. There were new procedures and protocols for doing that. And then she really galvanized the women's movement. This is around the time that third wave feminism was really coming into its own, and she ended up inspiring more and more women to run for office than had ever run before. 28 new seats were taken by women in Congress in the 92 class, which was called the Anita Hill class. 1992, we call, I know it sounds so quaint now, but it was the year of the woman. And this became a real important thing. And now I was talking to Dee Dee Myers about this yesterday, who was at this conference, and she was the first female press secretary for Bill Clinton. And she was, really saying, now we may see more people when we have a misogynist in chief whose cabinet looks like a 90s cigar bar. We're gonna, we could have this again. We could have, and I hope, a lot of your friends and colleagues, are running. We need to have engaged women running for important seats, and I hope that happens. But she was really, it helped tick things off. It's really funny. It's these little dominoes that you're talking about, like the Pamela Anderson tape, or that, that read a lot about those first. I found one of the first patients who took the Viagra in the trials, just trying to talk about the early triggers in the book.
So I when we talk about Anita Hill, I often think about the benefits of her and making it safe to be a woman in power. And then you put in Michael Douglas, and there's almost an entire chapter dedicated to Michael Douglas films. I had no idea how deeply they shaped my view of sexuality in the 90s.
Could have been.
Great. I thought it was great. Just in terms of just seeing reflected back what was happening, and the reflection that you put in there about, and I also didn't know that I'd like him so much, and because he's a little bit of a cad, and then.
A lot of it.
But he did say this great quote, which I think is true, and he was talking about feminism and how we had these short-term gains, but there were long-term effects. And he said, this is what I thought was such a great line: the libidos crawled away. Our libidos crawled away in the 90s, almost like everything had become
too politically correct.
Exactly.
Yeah, that in his view, and I think that's true. I mean, he's branded by feminists as being one of the not just a cad, but like this dark evil presence because of some of his films. We had Fatal Attraction, which really did not, is not a female-friendly film. You had Basic Instinct, which was sort of there were a lot of gay and lesbian protests against the film while it was being made. I think in San Francisco, I believe. He is a very polarizing character, but such a fun guy, and I had such a good time with him. That, I run into him at parties a lot, and we're always like, just so I went through his filmography, and there's a chapter in here about men's. There's 3 chapters on men's roles and 4 on women's roles, but one of the chapters is about films in the 90s that sort of relate to men. One key movie called Fiction. I talk about The Big Lebowski. I talk about Boys in the Hood. I talk about a number of films. But I do talk about at length about Michael Douglas, and he was basically making this point that he didn't decide to do men's roles that were in Disclosure. Demi Moore's character sort of sexually harasses him. I don't know if you remember. In Falling Down, he's a California worker who gets laid off and then goes turns violent. He had a lot of those films, in addition to the other 2 I mentioned, that were really looking at what men were coping with this advance of the women's movement, and how they were feeling like social collateral, a lot of men, and so I went through that a lot with him. He was just I thought very good on the subject.
So I'll write on that then, and I loved.
I hope you'll still read the book. It's like a highlight. You're gonna go to a movie and you see all that. I don't need to see it.
No, you need to read it. This is.
We're gonna get her to sign it too.
Yeah.
So more maybe
It's
some
so
more
good.
you'll want.
I can't wait to see. I have so much I want to talk about. Anyway, because I work with this. This is exactly what I work with. I see these people walking through the doors, and then to see it laid out so beautifully. So when you talk about men, and I don't think men are talked about enough.
You should do more moderating. You're really good at this. Most people are sticking to their list. You're jumping around, you're following through. This is your second career. I think this is a TV thing too for him.
But I want to, because I don't think men are talked about enough, and I think that men often get lumped into this place over there in dark sexuality, and you do such a beautiful job. And one of the things that you did in the book was you present these very personal and vulnerable stories. You know what I'm referring to?
Oh, hitting the wall.
Yeah, I thought that was amazing. And then here's what you said, and I think this is what I'm still seeing today walking through the doors. You said, you spoke to the cultural phenomenon saying that the Lebowski boys, that's what brought me, the Lebowski boys embody boomer gloom. They feel entitled but shortchanged. They feel noble but battered. They feel downsized by women and circumstance. I thought that was just such a great assessment of the overall culture. And so what needs to happen for men to find their footing again?
I hope I'll get the answer to that. I don't know that I do. I think this is a wake-up call, this president we have. I think he's projecting all the bad aspects of he's a caricature of male power. And I think David Frum, I quote in the book, on a totally different subject, there was a 1992 convention, a Republican convention in Houston, where the Republicans really, George H.W. Bush was running, and he was really a centrist, but in order to keep the coalition together, the Republicans embraced the right, the far right, and the regular Republicans, the centrist Republicans, David Frum said, they're almost like tourists in France who exaggerate the accents and dialects of the people in France to be more like them. And so this is what mainstream Republicans were doing, where they were becoming more and more pretend far right in order to appease them. And it was taken over, the Republican convention was taken over by the far right. This is what has happened now, is that we have a caricature macho president standing up to an everyday stage, standing up to ISIS, we're going to do the ISIS, we're going to do worse to them, and we're going to, the way he treats women, the way he treats North Korea. I mean, everything about, I believe, surrounding himself with generals and with, rich white guys who are, more intelligent than he, but that he can bully around. I think we've now got this great wake-up call that, what it means to be a bully is there in front of everybody, and no one's buying it. Men aren't buying it, women aren't buying it, the culture isn't buying it, and I think I think, if anything, people are beginning to see and voters who voted for him are beginning to see, even his base are beginning to see, wait a second, maybe this is how I am. They're looking in the mirror. I don't know, maybe I'm too cynical, maybe I'm too optimistic.
I hope you're right on it. So, I'm going to go back.
I see a lot of young faces here, and I was signing the books at the galleys at BEA in New York in June when there was going to be a book expo. And I thought I was writing a book for boomers, but really, people in their 20s and 30s say, no, the 90s is my decade. This is mine. So I'm getting a lot of young readers and a lot of people coming up and saying that the book is really about them too. So that is incredible.
For sure. It's about everybody. It's so immediate. So I just wanted, just for me, I thought that, I hope you don't mind me doing so many highlights, but Paula Jones, that story was...
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
Well, I thought it was devastating. You thought it was funny?
Well, it's a fun time. Hey, you know what? I'm not, but her accent is hard. Paula Jones was, basically, nothing would have happened with Bill Clinton, really, in his private life, had she not decided to sue on the last day before she was able to, I guess, the statute of limitations were going to run up the next day for sexual harassment. And I called her and said, why don't I'd love to interview you for the book. I explained the book, and she said, well, we're not fancy. Why don't we meet at the Olive Garden? So I went down to Arkansas, and she was just so much fun. Her husband was out bass fishing that day, and she arrived in this like aqua top and hoop earrings and a span. She had like jeans with like these diamonds encrusted in the back of them, these like rhinestoney things, and she was like, it was like in the 80s or something. And so we sat down, and she was just game for any question, and I really thought, just sort of charming in a way. But it was just a weird encounter, and so I really got to talk to her about why she felt used by the right, why she felt used by the White House, by the left, why she felt used by her own lawyers. She had a lot of pro bono people advising her, and why she agreed to pose in Penthouse magazine, which I didn't buy, but she was skeptical about it, but she was very, she was game. So I came away feeling favorable about it.
Yeah, she was actually kind of gullible and charming in a certain way. That was what was so powerful. Like it was like she had been so used, and she had no idea what happened or
so
why.
that part of it was quite pathetic. However, I saw her as, and now it's happened again. She was one of the three or four women who was paraded out before one of the debates with Hillary Clinton. So yeah, she's a pawn, but there you go.
Okay, another heartbreaker. Heidi Fleiss. That story was...
Oh, I've been trying to get her. If anybody knows where Heidi Fleiss is, see me afterwards. I just called her. She works with this. She's very close with a friend who runs the Bunny Ranch in Nevada. So, and I know her doctor. But she's lost touch with them. I think she's in a bad way. Maybe I don't know. I met her. Yes, I met her at her hacienda in the middle of, like on the fringes of Death Valley. I went for an hour and a half driving through Death Valley, and I arrived in this hill, and there's these two trailers that are put together into like a hacienda, and it's a Dole, the signs keep out, whatever, and drive up, and there she is with a parrot on her shoulder, not a parrot, a macaw on her shoulder, and bird shit all over her sweatshirt, and she's, come on in, it's my Robinson Crusoe house, come on in. And we sit down, she'd just come out of rehab for crystal meth. Yeah, she was good. Well, a white trash drug I take, that was my downfall. So we get into the house, and there's 20 macaws on all these perches, and with all these, everywhere you look, there's bird shit. And she said, my two housekeepers quit the same day 2 days ago. I'm cleaning up bird shit. I'm just like, and she has these floppy pink slippers on, and it was just so insane. And we sit down, and she was just so game, and she talked about prison, and she talked about running the biggest, most profitable, high-end escort service, prostitution ring in LA, and all the stars would go, and all the really wealthy out-of-towners and everybody. And so she was, she had in any one weekend women on planes in flying to 3 different continents at the Clinton inaugural, or at really high rollers, and so we talked about what that was like and why that was, what her life was like. She felt that in the end, what her contribution to society was really to say, everybody's got a secret. And she felt she made it easier for people because they recognized, people's secrets eventually come out if you scratch hard enough, and that she was part of that. But also she felt sad that she was part of this culture in the late 90s where you had tabloid TV. At one point in 1996, you had 16 news magazines and tabloid television shows. We don't have that as much now. It's on the internet or whatever, but at that, it was like cheaper to do. Tabloid was everywhere. And her cousin, Mike Fleiss, created Survivor. He created a lot of these shows, and she was on a few of them. And she felt she really contributed to the dumbing down of the culture, which she did not love.
Okay, so you point to the shift in media, and that, I hadn't realized what a huge factor that was, that all of a sudden you have news 24/7, you have MTV, you have reality shows, you have Fox News, you have social media coming into play. How does that shape the political arena we're in now?
It's everything. You did not have the World Wide Web before the 90s. You did not have this cable news war that you had CNN, but you had this news thing called Fox News that was riding on politics. And in the next year you had MSNBC, so you had to fill a lot of time with dead air, with scandal. They rode the Monica Lewinsky, Bill Clinton relationship into the sunset, and you had a consistent. You had two new genres. I mentioned tabloid TV and talk TV, but you had reality TV. It hadn't existed. MTV's The Real World was the first modern contemporary show, and it became by this 98, 99 season, like it was a sex show. It started out as a really interesting experiment. So what did you have? You had sort of a decay in decorum. You had political discourse that was coarseness. You had a fabrication of reality constantly. And so I think this is all because of these technological changes, these new genres on TV, the internet, etc. You really had a change in the culture and in the political system that has survived to this day.
Would you say that shifted with OJ, that was sort of
Yeah.
the break point?
Well, yeah, I think it was, Frank Rich, who I interviewed for the book, ties it to the Gulf War in 1991 Gulf War, which became the saga. America in the desert, or whatever they call it. And it was like every day you were watching this news, spectacle. And by then we're all watching sports and television that night, and then suddenly there's OJ and a Bronco, and everybody cuts to this Bronco, and then we have 370, 80, 90 days of a trial. There's a spectacle, there's Monica Lewinsky's spectacle, and then there's the impeachment spectacle, and then there's the hanging Chad spectacle, and now it's like every day is a spectacle. We got like 7 spectacles. So it was really this Guy Debord, the French philosopher, who talked about this sort of society of spectacle, and that's what unfortunately what we're living in. I hope we don't have too many questions from the crowd that we won't be able to.
Let's.
I'm just.
You guys
I don't
want to
wanna
ask
see-
questions?
I don't want to see people have to go out to dinner too, so.
Yeah. Let's get some questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Oh, maybe I spoke too soon. Henry, what's on your mind? No. Yeah.
So the individuals that you mentioned that were always bringing up Madonna in terms of power, did they mention that anything about their own sexuality contributes to their power, or was it simply that she was disfigured because she's clearly not the only powerful female in, that one can look at, but she had a particular type of power. She certainly, sexuality was a part of it.
Yes, no, a lot of people mentioned Hillary Clinton as being extremely important. Here it almost seems like a passé term, first lady, what does that mean anymore? But she was redefining what a first lady could be at that stage, and she was helping expand our vision of what women were. A lot of the other people I've talked about as well, but Madonna was particularly, she was basically saying, it doesn't matter what your sexuality is or how you express it. You just have to express it. And so a lot of that was sexually based. And Norman Mailer at one point interviewed her for Esquire, and I write about it in the book. And she said something that he asked her about this, and she said, I get all this crap for telling women to use their tits and asses, but you got to use everything. You got to use any advantage you have, and it doesn't matter if it seems exploitative. You're going to use it, and we're going to do it on your own terms. And so she was doing that. And you look at there's this movie about Truth or Dare, which was her. There was a movie Truth or Dare about her, but then there was this one of her tours that they did a movie about documentary, and she was really empowering the LGBT community, even though she was somehow taking a lot of that community's expression in her acts and whatever, but she was really empowering every single gender and race and through her career, through the arc of her career. So I think that's part of what it was she was trying to just try it on. And sexuality was a big deal in that whether it was exploitative, and people can think it's exploitative, and maybe it is from their perspective. Does that answer what you?
Yeah, I think so. It's
Yeah.
why so many.
Yeah, I think it's just people were having a tough time with defining themselves, and she helped that song Express Yourself.
I'm wondering, if you remember how you talked to your children about sexuality when they were coming of age, and if anything that you learned in the research of this book makes you think that you would have done something different.
I think I would have been more open, and my wife would have been more open. I think we're overprotective, I think, but it's very hard when you're a parent to understand where the limits are, and where you just learn it, you know. And so they're twins, so we didn't have one test run and then they try the next one. So.
Do you see any backlash to the emergent sexuality coming out of the 90s in today's culture with the emergence of the extreme right and the viewpoint of that everybody sees?
I don't know, what would you say? I mean, backlash is the key word. I mean, I write a lot on Susan Felice's book, Backlash. But I'm not sure. What do you think?
I think it's cool. I think yes, you see so much backlash, but I think it's also coming out a lot more. And it's almost like, I don't know if this is the best example, but it's almost like pot. You know, it's getting legalized everywhere. You kind of can't put it back in now. I think that's what's happening with sexuality. Like, you can say whatever you want, but it's coming out.
Yeah, that's really true. You better.
Yeah, I'm curious about the subtitle about the American Libido. Do you think there are some key differences then with Europe?
Yeah, I mean, we're a puritanical society and have been, and so we've had a tougher time, I think, than our European and other societies with sexuality. We're just more repressed as a culture, and so this sort of we overcompensate as we've come as we confronted. So it was really, the book is about this, how the people who grew up in the 60s then came of age in the 90s and took over the culture, and what does that mean during that period. And now it's, who knows, with the millennials and the Gen Z. But yeah, so this is an American, it's a book about America's own hang-ups more than anything else. A little bit of Britain in there.
I was wondering your thoughts on what's happened with the men's movement, because I remember growing up in the 90s, there was this response to feminism that, you know, hey, but women have empowered themselves, men haven't evolved. And then it seems like that's sort of...
Well, I mean, I would like to see more of the men's movement. Not that some of it is too far right for my taste and takes the women's movement down. But I would like to see more of an active men's movement, because men are still at sea. I interviewed Jesse Jackson about the Million Man March and the role, the importance of it, because men felt they were lost and felt it was their fault. And he said, no, we got to tell people that when you look in the mirror, it's not about you. It's about external forces that are the problem. Guns coming into the city, drugs coming into your community, jobs going off overseas, and you can't have change unless you understand that you're defined by what society's choices are. So Jesse Jackson was dealing with that. I talked with Bill McCartney, who founded the Promise Keepers, and I don't know if you remember in the 90s, tens of thousands of people were going into stadiums across this country and holding hands and passing around candles and really getting to understand what it meant to be a Christian man. It was really the idea that you were a good father, a good brother, but you would hang with like-minded men. And what happened in the 90s, I think, in the 80s, was that you had to spend more time working. You had more parenting chores, which were important. You had more demands for making a living. You had less time to hang with other men and to learn what it was like to be, what it was, to bond with other men. And so that's an important part. It has been historically since about 30,000 years, how men have worked since agrarian times. So, we need to be with others, and now there's this isolation. It's just really wrong.
Do you find helpful what David Dida has to write about the role of the man and
Tell
how
me
it's been evolving?
what buy some David Deal.
That's fine. No, sorry about that. But I mean, I think there was a good influence there where he said that men were at first looked at as breadwinners and women had a certain role. Then the men had to open up and become the emotional companion of the woman and be even softer than the woman, while the woman was rising into feminism, basically, or hardening into feminism in some ways. And then now there's a new shift where the man just has to be there and ignore all those feminine vibrations that are so erratic sometimes, and just be the holder of the whole thing.
No.
No?
We all have to be there for each other all the time.
Right, of course. I mean,
And
that's
then and I know I went with well, yeah, that's a good role for men to play, but I do feel we have to get more in touch with how men and women have to get more in touch with their natural rhythms of life. I went to I took anthropologist Helen Fisher on a bus ride in the book. Helen Fisher, I took her on a Sex and the City bus tour in New York, where we were there with 53 other women and Helen. And the bus, my wife and I were in lunch one day, and this bus comes in front of the sex shop right across from where we're having lunch. And it's called the Pleasure Chest, and this is one of the spots from the show Sex and the City. I thought, that would be great if I really want to go back into the 90s. This is what I should do. I should go on this bus, because it's taking you back into the 90s. People go to all the spots from Sex and the City, and I should take an anthropologist with me, because I don't understand. So I found Helen Fisher said, this is great. And she was saying, as we were watching these women, she was saying, this is really what women did, 2 million years ago, was that you get up and women would go here, men would go there, and men would go hunting, women would get 80% of the food, gathering, but they'd sit and talk. And after the weather, the first thing that we talk about was, boy, Johnny really was tough last night. He was, it was gossip, and it was really women who have the power, and men who sort of were running around trying to attract the women who conceive of life, and who you don't really need men to bring life now in our society today. But in those days, it was really important. So she was talking about how the bus, women hadn't changed. It was the bus itself that changed. In previous societies, you would not have women able, in the years since, you wouldn't have women who were able to go hang with other women, talk about sex in a free way, and it was sort of liberating, she felt, where I was sort of freaked out by it. People living in the 90s, but anyway. Yeah, a couple more, and then we should probably do some.
Two more?
Yeah,
Two more?
sure.
I'm curious about you actually. I'm curious if, like, looking back on your life is kind of just defining moment as a man relating to your own sexuality, that looking back is kind of like the passion behind this book.
I don't know yet. I'm trying to get to that. Hard to say. I don't know. I'm happily married for 32 years. But Henry would know, because I went to college with Henry, and I sewed my oats for a while, and he can tell you some stories. So I don't know. I'm a child of the '60s, let's say.
Yeah, I wanted to ask both of you a question. For you, David, looking back how you captured the 90s so well, also I'm curious about what were some of your personal experiences. And also, Nicole, if you're open to this, since you've been such a pioneer with sexuality and one case with writing slow sex, in what way did the 90s influence what you were doing in the 90s and 2000s with your work with sexuality and orgasm and all that? How did that influence?
Well, that's easy to answer, because I didn't really deal with much of this in the 90s. I was dealing with news and editing, traveling around the world doing stories, and then I was editing photography a lot, and my work and my child rearing was central. But I'd love to hear what Nicole has to say.
I think the blessing for me in the 90s is that Camille Paglia was around, and Madonna, and that there was suddenly a voice out there that I, as a woman, did not have to be victimized by my sexuality. And from that point, I then didn't have to be victimized by men. And then I could begin to explore a totally different way of relating to the world because I had access to my own power, and then I could see men as they are, as opposed to some external force that was causing me harm. Feminism until that point. So I either had the option prior to that of being broken, or I had the option of being angry. And in some way, they managed to blend those two things together so beautifully that I could actually be intimate instead.
So what we're going to do, here, we have